Well, joining me now is Gordon Chang, columnist and author of the book, The Coming Collapse of China. Gordon, you wrote an opinion piece saying that Trump is right to stop funding the World Health Organization and gave 4 reasons why. Can you explain why you say the WHO helped spread the coronavirus?
Yeah. Beijing knew about the human-to-human transmission of the coronavirus. They only talked about it publicly on January 20, but they knew about it well before, perhaps as far back as the second week of December. Well, the World Health Organization helped them propagate something that they knew to be false, and many people in the WHO knew to be false, and that was there was no contagious human-to-human contagion. Also, the WHO helped China, which wanted to pressure countries not to impose travel restrictions and quarantines on arrivals from China. That's how this disease was spread from China to the rest of the world. So you have the WHO supporting Beijing's important narratives, which caused the spread of this disease.
To the argument that the World Health Organization is too closely aligned with China, you mentioned Taiwan in your piece as an example. What are some of the other reasons for that perception?
You could probably go back before Dr. Tedros, who's the current Director General, to Margaret Chan, who was his predecessor. She was the first Chinese national actually to head a multilateral organization. And so China has had the WHO in its pocket for a very long time. And what we're seeing right now, which is a rot at the top of the organization, took many years to actually produce. And that really means that we need the top leadership of the WHO to resign, not just Director General Tedros, but also Bruce Aylward, who's called the senior advisor to Tedros, plus probably a lot of the Chinese nationals in leadership positions. There's a lot of good work that's done by the WHO at lower levels, but it doesn't really have the effect it should have because of political decisions that are being made at the top. These are decisions to support China. They're not decisions to support world health. And that's why it's important for the President of the United States to defund the organization, because we're not through this virus yet. And a lot of people say, well, now's not the time to reform. But if we wait, the pressure will come off and there will be no reform. We've seen that dynamic before. So I support the president's call for doing this now.
Gordon, there's fresh reporting that China has underreported its numbers, both total confirmed cases and in deaths. We see that also playing out in other countries like Britain, and even here in the United States, they're saying that there's a real-time lag. Can you explain why you say these are not the same?
Well, they're not the same. You know, in any reporting, you're going to have some delays. But in China, in addition to that, you're also having deliberate falsification because the gap is too large. And we have seen, for instance, in Wuhan, the epicenter, all of those tens of thousands of urns. Those numbers have not been reported even now. You know, I know if you go back to the early part of the epidemic, you could see that health workers and officials in Wuhan just couldn't keep up with all the deaths. They were just trying to scoop up the corpses from hospital floors and from the streets. And so, of course, accurate reporting was not at the top of the list of their priorities. That's completely understandable. But what we have not seen is the reporting in China catch up for what were obviously the underreporting in the beginning. And that's the real sin.
Gordon, finally, to the origins of the pandemic, it appears the narrative may be changing. Initially, reporting said this new strain of the coronavirus originated from a wet market in Wuhan province. Now there's a fresh new round of reporting that the United States government raised red flags about a lab in Wuhan that was studying bat coronaviruses back in 2018. Does this at all surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, even from the very beginning, there were 2 theories, wet market and a release from a lab. But one thing we couldn't find out, though, was because Beijing was preventing the foreign community from actually studying the origins of the outbreak. And what we have been learning recently is that the particular bat in question that is supposed to be the source of the coronavirus, that bat wasn't sold at the wet markets. So if you eliminate the wet market theory, then the only other possible source is one of those 2 laboratories that Beijing maintained in Wuhan. And we know that Beijing has been, as I mentioned, trying to suppress investigation. So they've got something to hide. which means that a release, an accidental release from one of these labs, is the most probable theory.
If it was created in the lab, what do you think the motive was?
Well, China has been storing coronaviruses for a long time. And I think this was an accidental release. But we've got to remember that Beijing's motives were malign. They knew for probably about 6 weeks that this was human to human transmissible. Not saying anything about it was dangerously irresponsible, but actually trying to mislead the international community to say that it wasn't transmissible. And then on top of that, trying to get countries to accept travelers from China. You know, I don't know what was in the leader's mind, Xi Jinping, but if ever seen the devastation to China, if he wanted to deliberately spread this to other countries to get even, well, he would have done exactly what he did, and the WHO helped him. That is the sin between the Communist Party of China and the World Health Organization. They took what should have been a localized outbreak in the center of China and they made it into a global pandemic.
All right, Gordon Chang, again, thank you so much for your time. We're going to have to leave it there.